Alright guys, welcome to the first episode of what I am calling Dev. So in this episode, I'm going to be answering some user-submitted questions, and I have a guest with me, Jon, and we're going to be answering some questions and basically getting two different perspectives on these. So to start off, I kind of just do an intro from Jon and kind of just tell the viewers what kind of programming experience you have and that sort of thing.
Okay, cool. My name is Jon McEwen. I'm the co-founder of Minters, which is an online marketplace for education. You can teach classes locally or you can do it remotely. My background, I actually went to school for philosophy, and then I went to graduate school for creative writing. After I left graduate school, I started doing web design type things with HTML and CSS. Then I later got into front-end frameworks, and that led me to found and build Minters with Ember and Firebase. So that's my background in a nutshell. I've been doing development for like about 3 years.
Cool. Alright, so let's start with the first question. So the first question is, do you think you need to have a college degree? And this was asked by Moni. So Jon, why don't you start? You got a degree in philosophy, right?
Right.
Do you feel like that has helped you up into this point? Would you recommend that? Or do you wish you got a CS degree?
That's a tough question. I think that getting a CS degree definitely gives you a leg up when you're applying to jobs, and those employers see that you have a CS degree. That's just kind of like an intuition. I've heard that when you're doing a CS degree, a lot of what you're doing is like math, and you don't necessarily take a lot of programming classes. I believe I heard that from you.
I would agree with that sentiment.
Said I've only taken Java. But I've also talked to other people who say that like the CS degree didn't give them hands-on experience developing web apps or anything like that, but they learned a lot of math, and then they were able to apply the kind of thinking that they did from school to development. So that's kind of that's my knowledge of it.
I think I'd agree with that. Like, you do not get I wouldn't say you get direct hands-on experience. You're going to learn some programming language doing, like, say, a computer science degree. But you are going to get, like, say, a general framework of how to think about problems, I guess. But I think one of the biggest things you're going to get is what you talked about, too, is getting a job through a CS degree. There's just a ton of what are called, like, new grad jobs. So as soon as you graduate college, there are companies that are specifically looking for new grads. Now, that's like starting to also change, though, I think a lot, where it's not just a single degree that matters, and there's a lot of companies out there that are accepting people without degrees, and like you're hearing companies like Apple and Google starting to make announcements that are like, we don't care about whether you have a CS degree or not. But I think if you're trying to decide between whether you want to go like get a CS degree or not, I think one of the pluses is you're going to have more job opportunities open to you because you have just those new grad jobs. But I think also at the same time, you're spending 4 years to get that. And I think you really need to look at what position you're in. And I think it differs if, say, you're someone who is like 18 years old, you just graduated high school, and then you're someone who is, I don't know, older, and you're like, I want to break into the CS field. I don't know if it's as worth to get a CS degree if you're older and trying to break into the CS degree or the CS field, in my opinion. I feel like those 4 years is not as valuable, and I feel like you can leverage something like a philosophy degree a little bit. And I'm actually leaning, I would lean towards more of like a coding boot camp to break into it at all. Do you have any opinions on coding boot camps at all? Did you ever consider doing one?
I did. So I'm self-taught, and I've been doing it for 3 years, and I don't work professionally as a developer. And I have a friend that does work as a developer, and he like very recently told me, have you considered doing a boot camp? And I think that I'm kind of too far into it on my own now. Mm-hmm. So I think that if I did a boot camp, like one of the smaller ones, I feel like a lot of it would be like review, and maybe the last end of it would be the more intense stuff that I would gain from. And I think that I can do that on my own now.
Yep.
But I'm not sure. I know that there are people who have done boot camps here in Austin that are having a hard time getting a job.
Yep.
And like I've talked to some of these people, and they seem to kind of like it seems like in the 12 weeks or whatever that they did the boot camp, they were just like drowned with a bunch of information, and I don't know how well they retained it.
Yeah.
So I don't really have a firm position on that.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing, right? Is do you go to a boot camp or do you try just learning it yourself? Because I think actually learning it yourself is a super viable option, especially if you already have some experience or if you're motivated yourself to put in the work to do it. I think where a boot camp is valuable, if you're someone where you've tried to learn on your own, but it just hasn't worked out, then maybe a boot camp is interesting to try out. But I think I've heard similar things where you kind of just are cramming knowledge into a boot camp, and that you're not always coming out of it learning a lot. You may be able to make some connections within the boot camp. Maybe that's helpful. But I've heard a similar sentiment where you've gone through a boot camp, you spent maybe 10 grand or something, whatever the cost is, then you come out of it, and then you're not able to find a job. Have you heard of Lambda School at all?
Yeah.
Have you seen the new concept they're going for, where instead of, say, you pay 10K up front, how they're doing it is you go through the Lambda School. I think there's an application, and then when it's complete, like you've gone through and you've learned, it's free to go to it. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think they're starting a program where they actually give you a stipend to go. Mm-hmm. And then after you get a job, that's when you have to pay Lambda. So I don't know if it's like 10% or 15%, but it's like after you make 50K or more with a degree, after going to Lambda School, then you pay Lambda School like 15% or some tax of your salary afterwards.
Right.
So it's one of those things where like Lambda School is only winning if you're getting a job at the end.
Right.
And I think that kind of direction is kind of interesting, because then it also incentivizes Lambda School itself to help its applicants get jobs.
Right.
Yeah.
It's probably pretty competitive to get into that program, though,
I think it is. I can't imagine. I bet the demand is like this, and then like the number of people that actually get in are just yeah. So cool. So all right, why don't we jump to the next question then? So the next question is, should people bother with startups or starting one themselves? So I guess I'll start with this one. So this one is, I'm currently working on my own startup right now. And so why am I doing this? I could have also, instead of doing that, I could be working as a software developer. So why did I go about doing this? For me personally, one of the reasons was I love being like my own boss, and I love building things myself. So I think the flexibility and being able to independently build something like that was very enticing to me. And being able to know that the amount of work that I put into something, I directly see feedback back, was big for me. So I know if I work in X hours or put in X hours of work into my startup, that over time I'm building something, and I like at the end of the day I have something to show that I've been building. I like the idea of like over time slowly like kind of building up something like that. So that was very enticing to me. And whenever I was, say, working at a job or an internship, I always felt like, man, I wish I was working on my own thing, that I was building something up. So for the most part, I've always had this itch to work on something. So that was like the reason why I ended up going this route, is because I always felt like I wish I was working on my own thing. And so I eventually was like, all right, I'm just going to do it. Was it the same for you? What was your experience with this sort of thing?
So when I left graduate school in Raleigh, North Carolina, I came down here, and I was doing a lot of I had just got into React, and it seemed like I was learning all of these things, but what I really wanted to do was work with the team. Mm-hmm. So I started this free boot camp, which was like a collaborative boot camp. All these people were going to come together, and we were going to find the material, and then instead of paying, we were all just going to
learn together.
Yeah, and support each other. And then I wasn't making any money off of that, but one night I realized that I could monetize it just by having everybody do this. Like you can create a digital boot camp for anything, like baking or language. So that's where the idea for Mentors came, and then it just became it was like I was holding this idea that was very hot, and I had to do something with it. So I thought it was going to be this is the next big thing. So that's where the fuel came to do the startup. So yeah, that's where that came from.
Okay, so do you have any tips to make a startup successful?
Yeah, I think that what you're going to want to do is, first of all, you're going to want to see if provided that you have some money, I think what you need to do is you need to spend that money wisely. And I think the general rule is that you're never going to have the money to build the app that you want. And if you're doing it yourself, you can just say that, like, well, you're never going to have the time or the resources to build the app that you want. And really what you want to do is you want to take your vision and scale it back and make it as stable and likely as possible that you can complete it. And then you want to think about what you're going to do after that thing is actually alive on the internet, because to me that's the more important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
You got an app, you have no users, congratulations.
Yeah.
You should really go get some users. So in summary, I think that build the app lean, get a marketing plan in place.
I think the biggest thing that I learned recently was I'm coming from a software background where, like, I highly value software developers and software in general. And so I got into this mode where I was kind of trying to perfect my code. And there's a lesson that I recently learned that I'm just starting to realize, and it was a hard lesson for me to learn, is it doesn't really matter the framework or the software that you use to actually build a startup or a website or a product. They don't actually see what language you used or any of that. It doesn't matter how clean your code is. It doesn't matter how many tests you wrote. All that matters is what the end consumer sees, what the process for them is. And so if you can build something nice and pleasant for them to use, it doesn't matter if you use PHP to build it, and it doesn't matter if you use React to use it in the latest frameworks. And so that was something that is, like, really hard for me to learn, because I would spend so much time with the quality of the code and make sure the code is perfect, and that I would spend so much time thinking about, am I coding this in a way that is using the best practices? And I still think about those things, but it is not the most important thing when I'm also juggling, I want to build something that people are going to use. And so I just kind of juggled those two thoughts now, whereas before I was only thinking about using good quality software, doing it in a way that will maintain well. Whereas now I'm starting to think more of, okay, how can I do in a way that may be faster, or how can I do it in a way that it's better for the user itself. Like, I actually think about how many, like, network requests and whatnot are going to be happening on this single page, and I may optimize the page so it doesn't have as many requests, but the end user really wants it to work in a different way, that it's like I need to stop thinking in a way as a software engineer and more thinking of it in a way as someone that is trying to get the end user the best experience. That was something that was very hard for me to learn, that I'm slowly trying to capture. Other than that, I just get all my knowledge from Y Combinator. I don't know if you've heard of them. So they're like just they're a startup incubator, and they just have a ton of resources online. They have, like, startup school is one of the resources. If you just Google them, they have a ton of stuff. That's pretty much where I've learned all my knowledge on startup stuff. Like, if I want to do anything with startups, I'll usually just go look at their resources, and they'll have something for it. And I just love their stuff. So those were the two questions we wanted to answer. Do you have any closing remarks that you want to add on to anything we said today?
Let me think. Well, I guess when you were talking just now, do you think that the struggle that you've had with thinking about the end user, do you think that that's something that, like, in a company you would have the UX team and then the engineering team kind of fighting with this tension? Like, the UX guys are going to be like, well, we need it to be like this, and the engineers are going to be thinking, we need it to be that's not going to be performant.
I think also, like, when you're in a company and you're just like a software engineer, I think I would think less about that sort of thing in general. Like, I don't think I'm thinking a lot about the end user or what the end user wants. I am thinking really more about the requirements that my manager gave me, or the requirements someone else gave me, and I'm basically kind of just building out a spec that someone else chose. So maybe that's the other thing, as when you're working in more a startup environment or a startup yourself, you think about more things than just the software itself. Like I feel like the software is almost like in a little box, and you're thinking about only that, whereas, like, you're thinking about more things than just the code itself and the code quality. I think about more things, I guess, rather than just those two. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
So that's what I would say on that. So yep, that was the first episode of DevDev. I hope you guys liked it, and add some questions down below and we'll answer them for the next episode.